It's that music. And I like that music. It tells me that my on-air working week is nearing its end. In fact, very much nearing its end, because I think Ben and Ruby, I'm giving them the keys to the car after 9 o'clock this morning. But it means, that music, Soul Bossing Over, that it's Free Speech Friday time, where we get a couple of free-speaking New Zealanders to do just that. Speak freely. I lay down a little bit of a broad agenda, and then we get into it here on the platform. Joining us today, writer extraordinaire, I think very sensible observer of life in New Zealand, long-time journalist, Yvonne van Dongen. Yvonne, lovely to have you with us again. How are you?
Great, lovely to be here. I'm glad you don't refer to me as left anymore, because I think I've...
did I call you lefty liberal?
Once you did, but and maybe once it was true, but sadly not anymore.
Well, no, you've seen the light. And also the host with the most, the man who's going to be debating with me, I think, on the 4th of July in Auckland. The little general from from Big HQ or HQ2, Leo Molloy. How are you, my friend?
Very good, Sean. Morning, Yvonne. I'm very well, but I'm not sure about the little general bit, unless you're comparing me to Napoleon, I suppose.
No, definitely Napoleon, who was the little general, and who was a strategic genius, Leo, I might add. Look, let's just kick off first, and we broke the news this morning that, and this is one of the reasons I wanted you both on. So news came out this week that this 20-year-old, I think colloquially called the Albert Park Granny Basher, who is a 20-year-old from Gisborne, and that's all we know about him because he has name suppression, got diversion or was being offered diversion by the police for what was a quite brutal assault caught on camera during that confrontation in Albert Park. Now, before we get to the development in the story, that in itself, the idea of him getting diversion and name suppression, created outrage. Was it an outrage you felt too, Yvonne?
Yes, definitely. I was just appalled. I was sure that at the very least, we'd find out who he was. I mean, Leo and I were scheduled to go to court, and I wanted to clap eyes on him, really. But yeah, I was just horrified. I thought, in this new victim-worshipping world we have, who's the greater victim here? Is this 20-year-old thug the greater victim than a 70-year-old grandmother?
Yeah, but diversion does exist for a reason, Yvonne, and that is that we don't totally destroy young people's lives when they make a mistake and they do something wrong. If they admit to doing it wrong, they say sorry, they pay reparation.
But doesn't the victim have a say in it? And also, most 20-year-olds don't go around punching 70-year-old women.
Yeah, I agree.
You know,
I agree with you on that. But I'm just saying that there is a reason that we have these systems in our justice, system. And I think you raise a good point. And it was, Leo, as someone who was involved in bringing this guy before, I'm not going to say to justice because I'm not quite sure we're there yet. You must have been pretty angry too when you hear that he'd got the old was going to get the slap over the back of the wrist with the wet bus ticket.
Okay, so things are in a state of flux there. I agree largely with what you're saying, and what we were told on Monday at the courthouse would appear to align with what you're saying. But I've never seen an official communique from the police that said he was going to get diversion. We were told that, I believe, by the registrar of the court or the Ministry of Justice, one or the other. I would add that diversion is normally reserved for those who are at the lower end of the scale of a particular type of offending, and you're right, it gives people a second chance without a black mark on their record. But I don't think this is a lower end of the scale situation here. This assault could easily have been aggravated, or it could have been male on female, both of which would have far more serious consequences. I personally was unimpressed when the police decided to proceed with the charge of common assault. I think it should have been upgraded, which would have precluded diversion.
All right. Now, my understanding from a variety of sources, I must say, Leo, is that the decision to grant him diversion may have been made in Gisborne or by authorities in Gisborne who were not fully aware of the ramifications or publicity surrounding this case or all the circumstances, and that diversion is now being reconsidered. I am not sure whether his name suppression is being reconsidered. One would also say there is so much publicity around this case that for a young person to have their name released may in itself represent, no matter the level of the crime, Leo, that might create problems for this young person that are a punishment in themselves.
I think my feelings around name suppression are fairly well known. I'd also add that diversion and name suppression don't necessarily go hand in hand. There's provision to have one without the other.
Yeah.
So with regard to his name suppression, I think there's a lot of pieces in the jigsaw puzzle missing here, and Yvonne will know this as well, that we need to find out what motivated this individual. He has a very, very insignificant digital footprint. There's something going on here. There's a piece or two of the jigsaw puzzle missing. We need to know what motivated to come from Gisborne to do what he did, why he was in the front line, and why he was so overtly aggressive towards that year-old soul that he punched in the face at least 3 times and body slammed him once. So, I think there's a bit more to the story yet, and I think it's important.
And we can't... Look, I think that's a good point, Leo.
Yeah.
And I said at the time, I said, gosh, I'd like to know what got that guy there. What drove him there? Was it the media hysteria, Yvonne? Was it the Chanel Lyles whipping up the hatred against Posey Parker? And if we don't know who he is, we can't figure that out, can we, Yvonne?
Yeah, because they would be, if it was the other side, they'd be all too keen to characterise him as some kind of
Nazi,
incel or some Nazi. So, we are entitled to know who he is and what motivated him. Did he come up from Gisborne especially? Was he in Auckland anyway? Did he belong to any group? I mean, that level of assault was really disturbing. I think with a lot of sentencing you see now, it just sends the wrong message. And we keep getting the wrong message that you can get away with violence, you can get away with certain behaviours if you cast yourself as some sort of vulnerable person. You can get away with it. And I think that's what's at the heart of these things quite often. We've got to it should be unacceptable to hit older women, no matter what. It should just be unacceptable, and he should be named and shamed.
But we have a justice system, Yvonne, not a revenge system.
No, but we do also have a system where we want to see justice be done. It doesn't feel like it's been seen to be done. And why? And I really do feel that the victim should have a say in what happened. And from what I hear,
she has,
I don't think
and
she
that's
wanted
another
diversion.
thing. I think the Victims of Crime Act does provide for that, and that may not have happened in this instance, which is why it's being revisited. But there will certainly be developments next week, I think.
I can confirm, and that's really the critical factor here, is that the victim has not as yet been consulted about this, and it's clear when you look at the definition of what qualifies for diversion, what the police officer who's had a diversion case has to take into consideration the views and sentiments, the feelings of the victim, and that hasn't happened.
And we were going to have her on this morning. She did confirm to us also that she had not been consulted. So hopefully we get some justice out of this. Look, I want to move on to... Well, I think and I have to be careful because I'm inside the industry, so I'm probably slightly obsessed by this. Radio New Zealand's Russia problem. A guy called Mike Hall, who is apparently an Irishman. He's got questionable views, well, some say questionable views on Facebook. Megan Whelan, the rather activist, feminist, lesbian activist, digital editor of Radio New Zealand, hires this guy. He works from home in Whangarei, and in at least 15 instances, he kind of skews international wire copy on the Ukraine conflict to be pro-Putin and pro-Russia. We also find out now that there are instances of stories about Gaza and Israel, and also claims that stories about transgenderism around the world are also skew-if. We have claims also from John Drinnan and other people that this woman, Megan Whelan, was given absolute carte blanche in the digital news space over and above the news editor of Radio New Zealand and even Paul Thompson, the chief executive. I got to be honest, guys, and Yvonne, the fact that Radio New Zealand is full of biased, self-interested journalists didn't exactly knock me off my feet.
I know. I felt the same thing. Seeing Paul Thompson being interviewed and he was squirming in his chair and apologising and seemingly so horrified, I thought, where have you been, Paul? Yeah. Where have you been? This has been happening, and stories have been tweaked or ignored. Yeah.
Well, he's been gaslighted. Radio New Zealand's been gaslighting the New Zealand public for years. It's one of the reasons I left.
And yes. And, I mean, even this week, you know, that you interviewed Suzanne Levy about that poll that showed that most New Zealanders were against self-sex ID. So she sent out that press release to every single MSN. Not one ran it. Not one, which I think is
It was
appalling.
such an interesting story.
I know, and I said to her, look, had it been Inside Out had done a poll and it showed that most New Zealanders were pro self-sex ID, the media would be all over it in an explosion of rainbows and glitter and God knows what. But not one ran the story. So that is a form of, that's just censorship. That's just, it's not tweaking the story. It's not running the story. And that happened time and time again. And that's why I think we've got self-sex ID, because the issues were not allowed to be aired.
Properly,
aired.
Yeah. Leo, you are not part of this self-interested group of journalists that Yvonne and I are. Are you surprised that RNZ is a bit bent when it comes to editorial stuff? And can it ever fix itself?
I love a glorious own goal, and this is Willie Jackson's most magnificent effort. He's tried very hard on multiple times to score own goals, but what I'm missing here is the input from Sanjana Haratua, that's how you say his name, and Kate Hanna. They're the ones who've been spouting on about disinformation, how it threatens the fabric of society. Here we find the government-owned organ, which Willie gave another $25 million a year to only about 2 months ago.
That's right.
And boldly announced at the time that he did it because Radio New Zealand gets it and no one else does. Well, read what you like into that. Clearly what they get is the well-named Red Radio. But, it's interesting, isn't it? The narrative being spun by them, they're just an organ, really, for the government policy, government strategy. They're putting their twist on it, but they're being caught out. So, can it be fixed? Possibly. Where would you fix it? Where would you begin? Where would it end? I think it's like trying to fix Auckland Council. It's not just about changing the mayor. You've got to change the 13,000 staff as well. So the challenge there is called start at the top and have a clean out right to the bottom, change the whole culture, change the philosophy, and agree that they'll prevent a factual version of events objectively rather than put their own bias. A number of issues there concern me. I was aware of the transgender spin they were putting in there, but the Palestinian issue is a particular concern to me because I think the slant on that particular type of disinformation is far too significant across mainstream media anyway, without RNZ endorsing it effectively.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, mentioning of the Disinformation Project, they've got a new hire, a Director of Communications, which I find hilarious because they won't communicate with anyone they disagree with, including the platform. She was behind the self-ID bill, apparently, and she has links to the Helen Clark Foundation. No doubt she'll be blocking people left, right and centre because she is the Director of Communications for the Disinformation Project. Look, media-wise, I know I didn't have this down on the agenda. I've spent a bit of this morning's show talking about a story, not a front-page story or a lead story, on the... on media last night and this morning about a canoe or a waka that has been found in Pattaya, in the river there, that dates back to the 1850s, 1860s. And I don't know if you guys saw the story last night, but I said an old canoe's been found, and this allows the local iwi to tell their story of how they were involved in Te Taikaware's War, and their chief was taken by the constabulary and incarcerated in the South Island, and 18 of the 75 people who got taken down there died. And this is terrible colonial oppression. But the problem was with that story, it had nothing to do with the canoe. It was just the chance to play the victim, and an acquiescent news media, News Hub, TV3, Radio New Zealand, and of course Stuff got into it. And it seemed to me, Yvonne, the story about finding an old, fully totara canoe by a river is in itself a good story and an interesting enough story without making up the victim porn that was added onto it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see the story, but I do agree with you. And also, I think that I don't think the media realises how much the public is onto them. And when they see this happening, they roll their eyes and they turn off. And so then again, you get that slow erosion of faith in the media, which I think is happening. Yeah. So I think they take the public for fools, to be honest. I really do.
And no one likes being taken for a fool, do they, Yvonne?
No, they don't. And they've got an education program, sort of an agenda going on. They want us to learn certain things or to understand certain things. But people are onto it, and they're not stupid, and they don't mind. They're not unfair or unreasonable, but they don't want to be talked down to.
Well, that story was almost as important, I thought, Leo, as Matty McLean's partner having a bird poop on him.
Oh, God. I do know.
Did you see that? Did you see that story?
Yeah.
I do like little Matty, but I've got to say, A-list celebrity, I mean, seriously, it means he's a nice little fella and, pleasant company. But A-list celebrity, I'm just struggling a wee bit to come to terms with that, but however, that's what it is.
Good on you. Look, we'll have a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about Ōpōtiki and the problem of Ōpōtiki. KiwiFertiliser.co.nz. Ron McLean is the guy who runs Kiwi Fertiliser, and it's kind of almost like a bespoke biological fertiliser company. And we're joined now by Ron McLean from KiwiFertiliser.co.nz. Ron, welcome to the platform. Thank you, and lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, good morning, Sean.
You are a very interesting little outfit. I think of fertiliser, and I think of something coming out of a plane that you buy in bulk and goes on the back of a truck. Kiwi Fertiliser is quite a lot different than that.
Yes, that's right. And that's what fertiliser is. But in order to get the right recipe to be going onto those soils, you first of all have to work with some reputable laboratory, which we do. So we follow exclusively the Albrecht-Kinsey soil science. The plugs of soil that we pull from properties, from dairy farms, hill country farms, horticulture, etc., all go across to the Perry lab in Missouri to be analysed. And then from that, they send an email back to say what nutrients are there in abundance and what nutrients are missing. And so we make up custom blends of fertiliser to fulfil the discrepancies in the soil.
Does that have advantages in terms of reducing things like nitrates in fertiliser? Does it mean you can be, and those who buy from you can actually be more environmentally aware and responsible?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a little catchphrase we call total replacement therapy. What that means is that we can totally replace a chemical type fertiliser operation with a biological. And in doing so, we've reduced nitrogen going onto dairy farms, for instance, from 190 units of N down to less than 40 units of N, and produced far more dry matter production with clovers going from about 30% in the sward right up to 70 and 80% in the sward. So a lot more clover production, therefore a lot more dry matter production, and a lot less pollution.
Hey, Ron, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Sean.
That's Ron McLean from KiwiFertiliser.co.nz. They are a biological, tailor-made fertiliser company. They are, indeed. All right, we are with Free Speech Fridays, our guests Yvonne van Dongen and Leo Molloy. Ōpōtiki, Eastern Bay of Plenty, a town that is lawless, one would, the headlines would have us believe. Firstly, Leo, do you believe the headlines? Is Ōpōtiki the Badlands? Is it out of control?
I think Ōpōtiki has had a long history of, gang-type activity, but before we commence this discussion, have we got the clearance from Rawiri Waititi to talk about this? Because based on his little...
have we got permission? Of course we've got permission to discuss it. Rawiri's playing to his voter base and doing it quite well, I must say. It is his neck of the...
Do you think he's doing well the way he's taken such an extreme position on these issues?
I have to make an admission. I was involved in media training those guys for the 2020 election after Chris Hipkins pulled out at the last moment. True story. And I said to them, you do not have to be nice to a journalist like Sean Plunket because your voter base, your support base, is completely unlike anyone else's support base. Your thing is to be as obnoxious to the white man as possible. That's how you're going to get the votes. And they've taken it to heart. I feel partly responsible for what's going on here. But you look at it in a political sense, Leo, everything they say that white people agree with is going to cost them votes. Because if you're on the Māori roll, we can presume you're Māori and that you are relatively radical in the spectrum. So, of course, they're going to play to that audience. And it's good politics for them, mate. They don't care what you think because you're not on the Māori roll.
Yeah, a lot of limiting factors there, though, when you take such extreme views. But, anyway, getting back to Ōpōtiki, so we're clearly going to talk about the gang issue. Is that
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe the consensus is that it might have been glorified a wee bit, what happened, what evolved, the treatment the gangs were given for that tangi, but you've still got to respect the tangi, so anything I say here...
Do you, Leo? Do you?
I think you do. No,
Why?
You do. I mean, someone's died and it's part of their culture. You don't have to respect the fact they were yahooing out the side of utes and sitting on top of...
I don't respect the fact that they belong to a gang which peddles drugs and deals misery.
Well, we're talking about the tangi first, so let's come back to the gang.
No, but how can you talk about the tangi without talking about the context of the tangi? The guy wasn't a good family man. He was a career criminal.
Well, that's possibly true. I'm not aware of his criminal convictions, but it's likely that he was, and I totally agree with you about the currency of drugs. It's particularly methamphetamine. If that's the currency they're trading in, then that's reprehensible. So, yes, I agree with that in some parts, but I still think you've got to respect the tangi. The man's died, he's got to be buried, he's got to go through the process.
All right.
It's cultural.
All right, I hear you that, Leo, but I'll put it to you, Yvonne. I think Stuff used the term, he lay in state.
I know. Did you see the TV1 story about it? That just blew me away. So they interviewed a woman.
I know, we played this yesterday, yeah. What a good guy he was.
So, yes, yeah. And I thought, good Lord, it's a wonder he didn't get a state funeral the way they were talking about him. It just was quite jarring. I thought, hang on, this is a man who's, a member of a gang, presumably committed crimes. Yeah. I don't know his charge sheet. And yet they portrayed him as some sort of hero. And that there was just little clips of what the town had put up with those people.
Well, but the way he was reported in the woke mainstream media, I'm surprised he didn't get a King's Birthday honour before he was, I think, mowed down or driven down by someone who owed him money for drugs. Yeah.
And then, so they downplayed the mongrel mob guys going Zeke Heil out of their cars, and I thought, hang on, if that had been a bunch of white guys doing that at
the Disinformation Project would have had babies, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would have. And then, the rest of us get tickets when we're in a bus lane, and here they are all over their, their utes and sticking out of everything. They're breaking the law a million different ways, and the police say that they'll take photos and, prosecute. But it feels like what disturbs me about this is that, again, it sends the wrong message that if you're powerful enough, you can bring a town to its knees. And the police will just observe. The police have become observers quite often now. We saw that at Albert Park. They were like UN observers. They don't do anything. They observe. They might take photos, and in fact, I think that if it hadn't been for Leo and the person taking videos, I don't think that young man would have come to justice at all. So that's
and I was actually going to say, getting back to that, Yvonne, and to you, Leo. The people really responsible for that assault at Albert Park were the police for not doing their jobs. Those people should never have been that closely physically proximate to each other, eh, Leo?
Well, how bad is the police intel? I know when the Domain gatherings were going during lockdown and the Tamaki Destiny Church were involved, I had police reach out to me and ask, and Newmarket Business Association, if I could get involved to try and bring that to an end, which we did successfully. But in this instance here, everybody knew what was happening at Albert Park. Everybody had seen Chanel Lull. Everybody knew Marama Davison and Chloe Swarbrick were fomenting discontent and violence, an extension of the discontent. Yet the police apparently sent 6 officers who I've seen numerous articles where the police are said to have been quoted as saying they're not here to protect or get involved with Posey Parker's team. They were just there as observers, as you say. So they may as well have been from the UN. Fair point.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, we were on Ōpōtiki, weren't we? The other thing too is, I'll be honest, Yvonne and Leo, it's pretty easy to whip up a story like that, and I'm a long time talk radio host and journalist. I sat there and reflected. I thought, well, I'm not in Ōpōtiki. I've been there and I know people from around there. But I'm not really there, and it's easy to write a headline that outrages people. Maybe the police did take the right approach by just trying to keep a lid on things, letting the dickheads in the gang do their dickhead stuff, and then the town can get back to normal. But equally, the idea that you shut down a town and you shut down schools because of a lawless funeral, Leo, it doesn't sit well with New Zealanders.
No, it definitely doesn't, and that we have issues there. Look, what I would say is that it looks like NZF and Winston are not going to make it over the line now. It's looking increasingly likely that their chances are evaporating. So I think one of the other major parties has to embrace this law and order issue, and somebody, I'm surprised, hasn't called for Costa's head before now. It should be effectively policy, because this comes from the top, this attitude of turning a blind eye to what's going on, and effectively, as you say, you're empowering the next generation of wannabe gangsters because they see this. And all it says to them is, if we flex our muscles enough, if we intimidate enough, we'll be allowed to do whatever we want, run roughshod over everybody and behave in a cavalier fashion. And I don't think that's the New Zealand...
But it's also the reality of life. In far-flung and depressed areas of New Zealand, out in our rural and provincial communities, this is the reality of life. It is different. It isn't like living in the leafy suburbs of, of Auckland or Wellington.
Yeah, but does that justify having to close schools, parks, libraries, roads? Aren't they entitled to the same protection, to the same rights as everybody else? Do they have to be, bending at the whim of this gang? I don't know. That just seems like an unfair way to portray it, really.
Yvonne's dead right. Everybody has to feel safe in this country, and there's a lot of issues going on in that gang space. The 501s is the primary issue, because when the rebels, who I see a whole group of them just patched over to the Comancheros, and the Comancheros established in this country, the other existing gangs who are already here had to beef their resources up. So they started recruiting. So we're in a bit of a vicious spiral here, and it has to be brought to an end. I don't know how you bring it to an end. It's quite tricky. There are some examples overseas. Queensland in particular managed to control their problem, but I'm never quite convinced that just flexing your muscles and going like for like with the police with tasers and guns is going to be a solution. But I don't know what the solution is, and that's quite the problem. It's an ever-expanding part of our society, the gang culture, and some people it's aspirational. That's all they see in life, is the opportunity to ride a Harley and have a girlfriend and do drugs. And that's sad, but that probably tells you something about where society's heading and where this country is averaging down instead of averaging up. But I don't honestly know the solution. I'll be curious to hear what other people think, but I don't have the solution.
Well, you keep listening to the platform, you certainly find out what other people think. Guys, always a pleasure to have you both on Free Speech Fridays. I hope you have a great weekend. I'm off to field days for my sins. I'm actually looking forward to it. Leo Molloy and Yvonne van Dongen, our Free Speech Friday panellists.